In America, a time when many of us in this Senate head back home to gather with students and families to celebrate amazing accomplishments. This past Saturday, I had the honor of joining the students at the Loyola University of Chicago Stritch School of Medicine for their commencement ceremony. It was an inspiring and hopeful celebration. These graduates, doctors, that I met this last weekend are heroes in the making. As future practitioners and medical researchers, they will dedicate their lives to healing our communities and our families, and we couldn't be prouder of their accomplishment. Let me also note two things. First, Loyola University Stritch School of Medicine was the first school of medicine in the United States to allow students with DACA status to apply for admission. They didn't set any quotas, but they said to these young people who have received recognition by our government that they can stay legally in the United States, though they were not born here. They have received recognition by our government and been held back from many of their ambitions. So when Loyola University of Chicago opened their doors for applications from those DACA students, young people, remarkable young people, all over the United States applied. So far, 32 graduated before last Saturday, and another 6 this past Saturday. Think of that. 38 DACA students who finally got a chance to go to medical school, proved themselves worthy, did great, now headed for their residencies and beyond. They will become an important part of America's future, and I'm so proud of Loyola University of Chicago for its leadership in doing that. I encourage all other schools to offer the same opportunities for these extraordinary DACA students to have a chance to continue to be part of America. The second person I want to mention is a hero that is of a special nature. She was tragically missing from Loyola's campus this past weekend. Her name is Preston. On Sunday, Chicago police officer Preston was set to receive her Master's of Jurisprudence from Loyola School of Law. But just days before her graduation ceremony, she was shot and killed outside of her home, right as she was returning home from a late shift on patrol. Officer Preston was one of the best of Chicago. At only 24 years of age, she'd served the Chicago Police Department for 3 years. And during her time on the force, she worked to build trust between law enforcement and the communities that she served. Officer Preston was inspired to become a police officer after taking a trip to Europe as part of her undergraduate criminology studies. Her class visited former concentration camps in Germany and Poland, the sites of some of the worst atrocities in human history. The stories of the Holocaust compelled Preston to the change she wanted to see in the world. She wanted to be part of it. In her words, and I quote, "When I got back home, I wanted to be an officer. I felt like I could be a person to fight for justice." And during her time on the force, that's exactly what she did. On Saturday, the day before Mother's Day, Officer Preston's mother, Dion, and her other family members walk on stage at Loyola University's ceremony to accept her diploma. I want to extend my deepest condolences to each and every one of them. Officer Preston and her family should be together today, celebrating their amazing accomplishment and her courageous service to our city. Instead, they are mourning her loss. She is yet another victim of America's epidemic of gun violence. Officer Preston's loss is especially poignant this week as we mark the beginning of Police Week. It's a time when law enforcement officers across the country travel here to Washington to meet with lawmakers and honor their peers who've lost their lives in the line of duty. The murder of Officer Preston in Chicago, as well as hundreds of other police officers who've died by gunfire in recent years, is a sobering reminder that no American is immune to the scourge of gun violence in this country. It was just 1 year ago this weekend when a white supremacist marched into a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, with an AR-15 assault-style rifle and opened fire, killing 10 black Americans. The first victim in that shooting was a man named Aaron Salter. At the time of the shooting, Mr. Salter, a former police officer, was working as a security guard at the grocery store. When the gunman showed up, Mr. Salter did not hesitate to leap into action. He opened fire on the gunman. There was only so much he could do. You see, Mr. Salter was armed with a handgun. The assailant had an AR-15 style rifle and was wearing a tactical vest. In this case, Mr. Salter was a good guy with a gun, but the bad guy had a bigger gun. Mr. Salter was forced into a position that no police officer, no security guard should ever find themselves in, being outgunned by a violent criminal. But this happens with alarming frequency, and it's because lawmakers have failed to do enough to stop guns from falling into the wrong hands. If we truly want to honor the sacrifices of heroes like Mr. Salter and Officer Preston, we need to do more than offer our prayers and condolences. We need to take action. And at this point, I want to salute you, Mr. President, because you and your wife and family have worked so hard to make this issue an important part of our agenda in America. In the years since the mass shooting in Buffalo, we've seen more than 650 mass shootings across America. Mass shooting takes place when 4 people are either killed or wounded in one incident. During that period, more than 40,000 of our fellow citizens have died from gunfire, which is now the #1 killer of our nation's children. The #1 killer of children under the age of 18 in America is gun violence. That's a fact. Time and again, we hear lawmakers argue in Washington and other places that guns really aren't the problem. Often they claim the real problem is mental illness. Well, here's the truth. Every nation on earth struggles with mental illness, but America is the only advanced nation that sees more mass shootings than there are days in a year. I want to deal with mental illness honestly, but to say that is the problem alone is to ignore the obvious. Last year, the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I chair, held a hearing on the crisis of gun violence in America. One of the witnesses we heard was the former Phoenix Police Chief, Jerry Williams. During that hearing, Chief Williams told the committee that our nation's gun laws are failing members of law enforcement like her. Here's what she said, and I quote, "We are outgunned, we're outmanned, we're outstaffed. We do need responsible gun legislation. There should be a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in order for us to properly serve and protect our communities." Chief Williams was right. Smart gun safety laws work. We've even had recent proof of it. Last year, the Senate finally passed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most important gun safety law in nearly 30 years. Thanks to that law, the Justice Department is able to perform enhanced background checks on buyers under the age of 21. According to the Department of Justice, these enhanced background checks have already prevented more than 160 firearms from falling into potentially dangerous hands. But that's not enough. We need to do more. Without more robust legislation like reining in assault weapons, we're not going to make the progress we need in protecting the lives of our families and communities. Mr. President, Friday afternoon, I had a visit in my Chicago office from 4 people. 1 was a mom, and 3 were pediatricians from the Highland Park community area in Highland Park area north of Chicago. We remember Highland Park because of the last 4th of July parade where a shooter got on the roof of a building and in a matter of 60 seconds fired off 83 rounds into an innocent crowd. 7 people died, over 50 were injured. 1 8-year-old boy was paralyzed for life. They came to talk to me about the AR-15 assault weapon crisis that we face in America. What they said to me, I cannot repeat on the floor of the Senate because they went into graphic, painful detail of what an AR-15 weapon does to the human body, and particularly what it does to children. Those small bodies, those compact little bodies, hit by an AR-15 round are forever damaged, and some of them in an impossible situation when it comes to medical care. They talked about the fact that, and we hear this so often, at the scene of these mass shootings, particularly in schools, when they collect DNA evidence from the parents to identify what's left of the body of the children after the assault weapons have been fired into their bodies. That is just a horrible thing, unimaginable thing when it comes to imagining your own children or grandchildren and what might happen to them. This mother who came as part of this group, which is known as March 4th, broke down in tears and told me that every single day now, since Highland Park a year ago, She worries about sending her kids to school. Will this be the day that they don't come home? No family, no parent, no grandparent should ever face that fear as we do in America, uniquely in America, because of the bewildering explanation of our Second Amendment. Unfortunately, instead of moving forward on sensible gun safety laws, some people in the other party will move backwards. Right now, the House MAGA majority is trying to erase a regulation that restricts braces that turn pistols into short-barreled rifles. That is the same kind of weapon carried by mass shooters in Dayton, Ohio, Boulder, Colorado, and recently in Nashville, Tennessee. These weapons are a danger to law enforcement and ordinary citizens. And now this Republican effort in the House wants to make it easier to access these deadly weapons, not harder. Does that make any sense at all? Moreover, at this very moment, MAGA Republicans are threatening to default on America's debt unless we pass Speaker McCarthy's bill to wipe out 30,000 law enforcement jobs. Talk about defunding the police. The McCarthy approach in making deep budget cuts not only affects the number of law enforcement who are on the beat trying to protect us every single day, but also makes a 25% cut in medical research in this country, something that is essential for every family's future. That's right, House Republicans threatening to trigger an economic crisis unless Democrats support their proposal to defund the police and basically eviscerate medical research in this country. That's coming from the same Republicans who spent years falsely claiming it was the Democrats who wanted to defund the police. Now we have clear evidence otherwise. Here they are supporting budget cuts that would leave law enforcement behind and make communities less safe. This is no way to honor the service and sacrifice of police officers across the country who've journeyed to Washington. If you're going to talk a big game about supporting law enforcement during your political campaign, you have to back it up with action when you're elected. Threatening a disastrous debt default unless we make massive budget cuts is no way to protect America. Let's make sure our officers have all the funding and resources they need to keep America safe, and that includes sensible gun safety laws that help keep weapons of war off America's streets. I yield the floor.